All right. Well, hello, everyone. Certainly a pleasure to present at the Tran-SET Conference 2020. And in this session, my name is Chris Melson, as Crystal mentioned. I'm the program manager of the Louisiana Local Technical Assistance Program, which is housed within the Louisiana Transportation Research Center, which is on the campus of LSU. And I'll be presenting a very small component of my Tran-SET-sponsored research project, where we disseminated a survey to a diverse group of Louisiana organizations to gauge their awareness and perception of connected automated vehicle technologies, CAV technologies, whether they believe their organization will be impacted by CAV technology, and whether it was important for them to prepare for CAV technology. And then we took those results and analyzed them in the context of a capability maturity model that was specific to CAV technologies, really looking at the collaboration partnership component, the collaboration capability. And really, I guess the purpose of the study is to show that even with a very basic study with limited information, I think it's still beneficial and still insightful for state DOTs or whoever agency it is to use this information to formulate their engagement and outreach activities related to developing partnerships related to CAV deployment. And so also from that, we developed a list of recommendations. I'm not going, unfortunately due to time, I'm not going to talk about these recommendations, but please let me know if you are interested. We developed a paper, even more comprehensive than the conference paper. So I'm happy to share it. Happy to talk also one-on-one. Just provide a little bit of context of the CAV related efforts here in Louisiana and looking at the administrative related efforts. The Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, the DOTD, developed a CAV technology team, which is an internal task force, very much a multidisciplinary task force. I think there's 30 members across 20 to 25 different divisional units, so multidisciplinary. And they were tasked with really gaining knowledge of CAV technologies, the maturity, also what other states are doing, what also is the national initiatives, and to eventually formulate policy or planning documents. And right now they're currently developing their CAV strategic plan through a consultant. And this is really where the idea of the survey came from, almost selfishly, frankly. It wasn't part of the original scope. But kind of just to show that even at this stage, which is internal planning stage, it's still important to engage external organizations, not only to reflect their feedback in the plan, but also to have it as a mechanism to develop partnerships. And also just, this isn't a DOTD sponsored project. And also, I'm not representing DOTD. I think they're doing a great job in this, but don't tell someone that Chris said this on behalf of DOTD, because I did not. And so we kind of looked at what other state DOTs, of course, are doing related to CAV efforts. I mean, this is a huge field, lots of research, a lot of pilots, a lot of demonstrations. So there's definitely a lot of things going on. But also, once you look at the state level, there's also not a lot of things going on. So we kind of categorized it here, where really, when I say CAV efforts, this could be projects, research projects. I mean, these could be pilots, this could be demonstrations, this could be other deployments, and this could be just internal planning. So of course, none is that state DOT. Again, this is public facing information that they are not involved in a CAV related effort. Undirected here means that they are involved in a CAV related effort, but they are not the ones that directed it. They didn't start it, and they may not be the main beneficiary of that effort. For example, several of these states here, they passed, legislation passed that allowed autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles on their roadway. And then the state DOT kind of had to make procedures on how to manage that. So that's an example in that category. Directed, again, the state is directing it. Coordinated above that is not only are they directing CAV efforts, again, these could be research to pilots to full-scale deployments, but there's a mechanism to actually coordinate that among the state. And then the most mature being programs. And when I say program, I mean, having a long-standing mechanism for large-scale deployment. So for example, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, and Virginia all have, their state DOT has a CAV program. And again, I mentioned this, like, again, we want this to not only help, Louisiana or be Louisiana specific, to be a case study. And also to point out that even though there's a lot of initiatives going on, it's still important to focus on these states that are just looking at it now and to help them with their deployment. Here is the survey. Again, very brief. I think it's 2 to 3 minutes. And we asked, again, we looked at organizations. So these aren't individuals. We asked that individual is filling it out on behalf of their organization. So as I mentioned before, looking at the overall awareness, the overall perception of CAV technologies, whether they believe CAV technologies would provide a meaningful impact to their organization's purview, and again, how important it is for them to prepare. And we disseminated the survey, this is electronic, to 273 organizations or major divisional units within those organizations here in Louisiana. And again, CAVs are really any technology like ITS related technology. They could be, not only going to have impacts to the transportation system, but to fields that are reliant on the transportation system. So potentially could have impacts to land use, the environment, socioeconomic impacts as well. So we were definitely going with a broad outreach here. So we grouped the organizations that we contacted into these 10 functional categories here on the left. Advocacy groups were nonprofits aimed at solving inequity. Aging communities for us mainly consisted of local and parish councils on aging, which provide critical transportation service to the elderly here in Louisiana. Disadvantaged groups were mainly, again, for us, were local ARC organizations, which again provide critical transportation service to those that have disabilities. I won't go through all of these. Freight, for example, freight included each commercial airport here in Louisiana, each port, as well as the largest trucking companies operating in Louisiana. Transit were the main transit providers in Louisiana. So of the 273 that we sent out, 117 completed the survey. And we thought about, how do we present the results? And we decided to cluster them into like responses. And we looked at different clustering methods. We looked at different clustering sizes and decided that this was the best fit for the data and for what we were trying to do. So generally, again, they were clustered on like responses. So generally, you can say that Group A was uninformed of CAV technologies and did not believe that their organization would be impacted. Group B were more aware, but still didn't believe that their organization would be impacted. Group C, quite a stark difference, had high awareness, had high positive perception. I believed their organization purview would be impacted and believed it was important to prepare. I know this is a busy graph, but I might try to point out a few things. Again, the shapes and the colors correspond to the functional categories that I just mentioned. And the main point is if it's bolded. So for example, this is aging communities. So if that functional category is bolded here, that means that primarily resides in this group. So for example, aging communities primarily are in Group A, uninformed, don't believe that, the organization will be impacted. Another example is transit here. And then I guess I can just generally state all those. So for Group A included, let me try to get my notes. Aging communities, as I mentioned, disadvantaged groups, economic development groups, and freight, again in Group A. Group B were advocacy groups, environmental quality, and transit. And then for Group 3, kind of as you expected, more transportation-focused groups related to safety, traffic operations, and planning. And again, why did we do this? Again, some value, hopefully, to the state DOT. You can group them in here in these groups. And then when you're planning out, if you want an educational campaign or other outreach, you can kind of customize it based off these groups. We also looked, at the individual questions. Here's the awareness and perception question. I guess it's kind of hard to tell when you plot it separately, but visually you can kind of see that there was a relationship between them. And we did statistically test that, and there was a statistically significant relationship between awareness and perception, meaning that if you had a low awareness as an organization, you had low positive perception, so negative perception. If you had high awareness, you had positive perception. Again, I think that's beneficial information to know. If you're doing, for example, as I mentioned, an educational campaign, it actually might be effective in raising the awareness. You also might be able to raise the positive perception of that organization, and if you needed to have buy-in related to a CAV deployment. These are just the other questions, the likelihood of impact, and then also the importance of preparing. I'd say generally the results are as expected, except one of the areas of, not surprised, but maybe areas of concern is that there was low awareness and perception of, and also low likelihood of impact and importance of preparing for freight and transit organizations. Since, there's some very specific CAV applications that are related to transit or last mile services or mobility as a service. So transit could very much be impacted. And then obviously with freight too, there's specific applications related to freight, and freight being such a major component to the Louisiana economy. Those were really the main areas of concern or just of interest. We also, instead of plotting it by functional category, we plotted it by public agents, by agency type, excuse me. So on the right is the survey results of them. Is it important to prepare? That's what the diamonds are. And then on the left is, are they actually preparing? And as you can see, how important it is to prepare. It's between, neither important or somewhat important. So I'd say somewhat important with kind of limited variation. But there's a wide variation of people that are actually, or organizations that are actually preparing. And again, I think that's good information to know. Number one, you can identify who has experience and maybe leverage that, but also to see who thinks it is important and maybe does not have the resources or doesn't know how to actually prepare. Again, the state DOT may be able to assist them in that, and in doing so, build partnerships. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger here. Again, we also went through the results and the capability and maturity model, and again, looking at collaboration. So what you kind of need to do to move up and have a more mature partnerships in terms of, again, CAV deployment. So these are, again, in a paper. So if you are interested, you can also ask questions during the time, but you can also just email me if you want to know about that more. I also have some information on this website here about the project and also about the survey results. But again, feel free to contact me with any questions. Of course, you can ask your questions here during the time. And then I just wanted to also point out Dr. Joshi Ma, who was at University of Cincinnati but is now at UCLA, also assisted in this project greatly. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? You can either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can type it over here in the chat box. Okay. Sounds like we don't currently have any questions. We can always come back to it, or you can contact Christopher Melson directly. He's got his contact information there. I see a comment that says, give a brief recommendation. I'm not sure what that means.
Oh, okay. So one recommendation, again, I skipped them in order of time. I guess I drew some interest, so that's good. Was, for example, we also looked at best practices. So one very general recommendation could be, as a state DOT, you develop some longstanding forum for collaboration for CAV deployment. So you have a CAV advisory council, but also have it meet regularly as a forum to gather this information, to gather feedback from these organizations, but also have a plan where you do engage them in that forum, for example. Again, we went through these specific organizations and then kind of made a list even of those that you could contact in that way by groups. So again, the recommendations are general, but I also try to make it fit, obviously use the data in the recommendations as well. So that's so that was kind of a stupid answer, but that was a very general recommendation to have a CAV advisory council with the forum. And then based off of that data, we gave more detailed recommendations.
Okay, great.